What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Progressive Gentlemen podcast. As always, we're your hosts, Matt and Dan, and thank you for taking the time to listen to us nerd out about music. So we actually have a new one. Something we kind of wanted to do moving forward is maybe do some fun lists, like top 10 lists, whether it's albums, songs.
We're now BuzzFeed.
Yes, basically. we are your BuzzFeed podcast for all things progressive metal. But, and I guess just progressive music, right? But, so the first list we wanted to do was going to be like a top 10 albums just in prog, just prog music. Doesn't have to be prog metal, doesn't have to be prog rock, just progressive music records.
Just generic. We'll start off with like an easier, or I guess maybe a harder.
Say, I honestly was thinking, maybe we should drill this down a little bit more because my list just kept growing and it was really hard to shrink it down to 10 records.
Yeah, I started off with like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to get 10. And then I was like, oh, I have way more than 10.
Yeah, I think my initial run through, I had 40 records on a list and I was just like, how am I going to get this down to 10? And
yeah.
My like bargaining with myself as to which one should make it and which one shouldn't. I probably got a little bit too into it than I should have. But just to kind of clarify the rules on these a little bit. So progressive music, first off.
Yeah.
We tried to avoid multiple records from like the same band just to keep it like diversified a little bit.
Yeah, that way we didn't just have like 10 from Between the Buried and Me or Coheed or something. I was
going to say my list would end up being mostly Between the Buried and Me, Coheed, Contortionist, stuff like that. So it was just, it was easier to do it that way. I thought not easier. It actually made it harder, but I kind of liked it better that way. I think.
Yeah, it makes a better list, and I feel like it's better too for people listening who want like musical suggestions on bands maybe they haven't heard of or albums. Then it's like we'll have a more diverse list rather than be like, all right, my top 10 is all Between the Buried and Me. So have fun.
You could have just listened to our artist spotlight episode and got the same content, but yeah. But yeah, so I think it was a little bit of a challenge. It was a fun challenge. And I'm
like still before we hit record was like, do I change this one?
We did make some last minute changes. We did. And just to clarify as well, this isn't necessarily, we're going to split this up, by the way. This episode is going to be Matt's top 10 list. And then in a future episode, probably dropping next week, will be my top 10 list, just to split it up a little bit. And that way it's not as confusing as to, that was Dan's number 7, but Matt's number 3, and they talked about it first, and it doesn't make any sense. So just to keep it a little bit more clear, we're going to split it up into 2 episodes, and I think that'll make it a little bit fun. But just to clarify a little bit, these are our top 10 lists. This is just, this is an opinion type situation.
It's our 10 favorite, not like the best albums, like matter of factly.
Right. And we might have put some records on our list just that may not actually be a top 10 favorite record of ours, but because it was important to the genre or something like that. But these are our lists. We made the rules kind of. So don't be too harsh on us. It was pretty tough. So
yeah, we tried to give ourselves some rules to like follow so that our lists were kind of like had the same like attack at them of like how we came up with them and stuff. And it sounds like we have some similar bands, but like our lists are pretty different, so it'll be cool to like talk about them and see how they differ.
Yep, and we tried to do this too without input from each other. Because if I was messaging Matt, I'm putting this, or which record, should I put on this list? I feel like our lists would have been more similar. Yeah. So I think it kind of made it better to keep that. It's like just keep it to ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, up until like right before we started recording, we didn't know each other's top 10. So there is some crossover,
but it's not as much as maybe we would have thought. So that is kind of cool. But yeah, I guess without further ado, you want to start with some honorable mentions, because I feel like we need to mention some of these bands that are these records, bands, whatever, that didn't make the list, just so people are like, all right, well, at least they didn't forget some of these records, because this was hard.
Yeah, I know for sure I definitely missed bands and albums that like I've listened to a million times, and just the nature of when I have to like write something down, my brain just goes blank. So I'm sure I missed some. I tried to like check against lists online and like Wikipedia articles with bands to like get a good list and make sure I got ones that I was like, oh yeah, and so I didn't forget. But yeah, some of my honorable mentions, and some of these bands may make it onto my top 10. I could only pick one album, so but I'll just
the rules.
Yeah, so I'll just rattle them off quick here. We got The Contortionist, Exoplanet, Between the Buried and Me, Great Misdirect, Between the Buried and Me, Coma Ecliptic,
Between the Buried and Me, discography.
Yeah, all of them. Leprous, Pitfalls, Fallujah's Dreamless, Gojira's Les Enfants Sauvages.
Enfants Sauvages.
Yeah.
Great record.
Vildhjarta's Mastodon. I probably butchered that pronunciation too. Pliny, Impulse Voices, Intervals, The Shape of Color, Russian Circles Station, and Mars Volta, Deloused, and The Comatorium.
Yes.
I would have had multiple albums by most of those bands. I tried to like narrow it down a little bit.
Yeah.
And even for my honorable mentions, because I have like 10 of them.
Yeah, honestly, I'm looking at my honorable mention list here, which I'll talk about on my episode, but I could probably
you have more honorable mentions than
I have like 3 sheets of notebook paper with just a bunch of bands and records, but every single one you mentioned is on my list as well. So all great records, and it's hard keeping any of those off of a list, especially some of those where we narrowed it to one record from each band. It's really hard to not see the Great Misdirect on a top 10 list. Exoplanet as well. L'Enfant Sauvage. Honestly, that's my favorite Gojira record, and I don't know if I had it written down on my list, but that's a really good record right there. I didn't think about that one.
Yeah, I was like, that was one that I was really, really wanted to put on my top 10.
From Mars to Sirius as well would have been a good one with whales.
Yeah,
just the whole whale theme.
Yeah, there was like so many
Gojira as like whale metal.
Yeah. Yeah, so then I guess getting into the top 10,
without further ado, here we go.
We'll I'll work my way up from 10 to 1, just build the suspense.
Way to do it. It's also really hard to put these in an order once you get to 10 too. So probably don't hold us to this either.
Yeah, honestly, like some of this probably also is recency bias once I get up my list a little bit. But number 10, I have Animals as Leaders, Joy of Motion.
Nice.
As much as like I absolutely love Animals as Leaders and I listen to them regularly, but they're definitely not like I probably wouldn't have put them on my top 10, but just because of how much they've done for progressive music, like just Tosin's that thumping strategy is like it's come through in a lot of other bands.
It's definitely, I mean, you see bands like Polyphia using that style a lot now, and just all instrumental bands that have sort of taken pages out of Tosin's book have, added that to their repertoire as well. I've seen Unprocessed do it a good bit.
And I feel like Intervals does it a little.
I don't know. See, that was one for me where I was like, Aaron Marshall's got his own thing going on.
Yeah.
He's sort of established his own style, which I'm very jealous of. He probably has my favorite guitar tone of any instrumental artist out right now. Between him and Pliny, it's tough.
Yeah. And that's why I had to have both Pliny and Intervals on my list because I listened to them so much.
Yeah.
And I wanted to put them on there, but I just feel like out of those bands, like Animals as Leaders probably has done more for the genre.
Pioneers it's not a stretch really. I mean, Tosin and Javier, they are kind of pioneering their own sort of sect of instrumental progressive metal.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of bands that try and kind of like they want to imitate their sound. They may like take it and make it their own, but they're like very heavily inspired by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I
know you were back and forth too with which Animals as Leaders record to put on there too, because you were between this and the self-titled. And
until right before we recorded, I had self-titled, and then I was like looking at the track list again, and I was just like, I like Joy of Motion better, I think, just based off of the tracks like Woven Web, Physical Education.
Yeah, Physical Education is good.
Lippincott. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
No, I think that's right.
But there's like 5 or 6 songs on there that are just like heavy in my rotation, whereas there are fewer in their self-titled. I mean, they're both great albums, but
I think I sort of like got into Animals as Leaders through the self-titled, and like On Impulse was probably the first track that kind of I connected with, and then like CAFO was a really good one too, or CAFO. It probably, I don't know if it's actually, I don't know.
Yeah, but, I always thought it was CAFO, but I've never actually like.
Yeah, those two tracks for me were like my introduction, and probably like the tracks that were in the rotation the most for me. But then when Joy of Motion came out, I actually bought it on iTunes, and whenever my Spotify doesn't connect to my car,
it just automatically
it's one of the
it.
few things I've ever actually bought on iTunes, so like that just kicks on. So I actually listen to Joy of Motion a good bit.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good choice.
Yeah. It was a tough decision, but then I narrowed it down to that one. I feel pretty confident about that after having spoken it into existence. Yeah. I don't regret the decision. So
that's a good number 10 right there.
Yeah, I feel and it's only going up from here, at least in my opinion. Maybe other people don't agree, but
I agree.
Well, I'm glad at least someone approved.
That's why we're friends and we do a podcast together. We share a lot of opinions.
I need just this support system. So I guess moving on to the next one, my number 9, Delta Sleep, Spring Island. And this was one I mentioned with the recency bias. Yeah. I listened to this album weekly, and there's like not a single song on it that I skip. And it's not an album that you have to listen to front to back. Like, it's not a concept album in that regard, that it's like, one song flows into the other necessarily, but they're just all good. Yeah. So, and also I wanted to have a more like prog rock band on here. Like my list, I definitely skew prog metal over prog rock, but I wanted to have the representation in here, and what better band than Delta Sleep to be on the list. Yeah,
I mean, this is probably my favorite record right now. I listen to it daily, which is insane. I am probably like 25% of their stream counts on Spotify. I love this record. I think it's perfect. I do think it's my favorite Delta Sleep record.
Yeah.
I was back and forth with any Delta Sleep on my list just because of the argument that, well, it's math rock versus prog rock, and the difference is, they use the time signatures and stuff like that, but it's a little bit more digestible and they don't get into the concepts and blah, 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 whatever argument you want to make. I look at this record as a semi-concept record with the whole, they get into, Spring Island and blah, 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 and it's a whole like play on, climate change and stuff like that. You can kind of pick that up in their lyrics, and whether or not you deem that as like a concept or not, I guess, is all up for interpretation, but that's what music is. So I would argue strongly that they are a prog rock band, and math rock, prog rock are pretty often in the same vein. So
yeah, I kind of use the term interchangeably. I mean, I know that there's a differentiation, but like, I feel like that's just splitting hairs. Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, and if you literally come down to, it has to have a concept. Well, then how is any of this instrumental prog considered prog? You know what I mean? So like, if there's, it's hard to have a concept when there's no lyrics. So, I mean, and somebody's probably listening to this like, oh, this idiot doesn't understand, but
we're not gatekeeping. We're just enjoying the music.
I would easily put them in that progressive rock category. Yeah. And I love that choice. Yeah. Like I said, probably my favorite record right now.
Yeah. I've been listening to it a lot, and I think like, probably from, if you're going based off of like my recent like time played, it would be like my number 1. So like, that's why this list is like, it's kind of, there's some nostalgia feeling added in there, and like, kind of when in your life it hit and stuff. So there's like a lot of factors that change where they land and stuff for me.
I actually did that like Spotify pie thing. I don't know if you've seen that trend. And they were number 1. I kind of figured that. What throws it off though is Dance Gavin Dance was number 2, because I went through their entire discography for like a couple weeks straight, just trying to like get into them for that Coheed tour that they're no longer a part of. But we'll talk about that some other time. But anyways, Spring Island, fantastic. Ghost City would have been a good one for this too.
Yeah, that was kind of like my debate between those two, I think.
But yeah, I really like the choice there.
Then moving on to number 8, I have Vola Witness, another album from last year. So another reason why I mentioned the recency bias. I love this album, and actually, like, I went for a run this morning and just put that album on and listened to it straight through. Like, didn't skip any songs. Like, it's just so well put together. Like, the tracks are interesting and they're all very different, and I don't know. I just love Vola's sound, and this was also hard to choose between Witness and In Mazes.
I was gonna say, yeah, In Mazes, whenever that came out back in whatever the hell year that was, 2016, 17.
Yeah, it's been a few.
I would have never heard of them if they didn't pop up on either some Spotify playlist, or back in the day, back in those days, I was always just trying to find new music. So I'd go to YouTube and stuff like that and type in, like, you know, new metal bands or whatever, bands you haven't heard of, stuff like that. They might have showed up on something like that.
Yeah, or like dig into the, like, you might like because you listen to.
But they were always really interesting, and I think, like, Stray the Skies was probably the track off of that In Mazes record that showed up on whatever that was, and that was heavily in my rotation back then.
That's a good song.
I went and downloaded it probably by less than legal means, and I've since bought a lot of their records and seen, you know, I have a lot of their stuff on vinyl and all that stuff, so, you know, I still contribute, but and I don't really download music anymore, but regardless, that's what Spotify's for, right?
Yeah.
But I do think Witness is the better record, so I think that's the right choice. I think it's more complete.
Yeah, that's what just looking at the track list, there were, like, I would say In Mazes is probably my favorite song by them, but there were just more songs on Witness. I was just going through and I was like, oh, I like this one. Yeah, this one too. And it was like, I felt confident this morning after, like, I got back from my run. I'm like, yeah, I'm happy I picked Witness. So it definitely that is a solid spot 8 on my list.
And it's cool with the different, like, style changes of the songs on that record. I mean, like, you get a pretty straightforward prog metal song out of, like, Straight Lines. They slow it down a little bit with the 24 Light Years track.
Yeah.
They have a rapper named Shaman on a track called These Black Claws.
It kind of almost, like, makes it like prog new metal a little.
And then you get, like, that slightly heavy-ish vibe from Stone Leader Falling Down. So it's a good mix. It's still they still have a very unique sound. You know, any song that you listen to on that record, if you listen to Vola, you can pretty much point, like, similar to, like, a band like Astronoid, where it's like whenever you're listening to one of their songs, you're like, that's who that is. If you've heard of them, you know they have that just unique sound. I think Vola is very much like that, and this record keeps you on your toes, and I do like it in a top 10 list as well.
Yeah, I was like, part of me was like, I think I'm just putting it on here because, you know, it's so new, so it's still, like, heavy in my rotation. But, like, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, no, that definitely belongs on my list. Like, it's not because it's recent. Yeah,
I like that for sure. And you have been hyping up Vola pretty heavy since that record came out. So I would have been surprised maybe not to see a Vola record on your top 10 . So that fits.
I was honestly like,
was it your album of the year?
It was.
Yeah. Yep. You can go listen to our 2021 album of the year podcast episode to hear
us talk more
where
about
all those fell. Yeah, but.
Yeah,
that makes, and Spring Island was mine, so we just kind of went back to back there.
and Spring Island, it was high on my list. I think it was like 3
number 2 or 3
or something like that. Yeah, so it was pretty high up there. So, you know, I kept it consistent with my list from last year.
Absolutely.
So number 7, getting much heavier with Meshuggah's Nothing.
There we go. There's a grandfather of Djent.
I had to keep the old Djent daddies on the list. You know, it's just being such a fan of progressive metal and stuff. Like, I love Meshuggah and I listen to them pretty often, but definitely not as often as some of the other bands that, say, like Gojira, that I had on my honorable mentions. But I just, like, they belong on a list. You know, they're kind of the people that pioneered the genre, and I mean, they're just heavy as hell, and
Yeah.
I mean, you still like, you see like on all like the metal memes pages and stuff, like people are always sharing Meshuggah clips, and you know, they have their new album that just came out and stuff like it's, you know, they're still relevant and still heavy as hell and stuff. I mean, nothing just is on the top of my list because of the that track list is probably has the most songs on it for me that stick. I mean, obviously, like everybody who knows Meshuggah is like Bleed,
right?
Which
so
yes,
Hobson, but you know,
yeah.
But no, I get it. I think, and we were kind of having a slight conversation about this before we started recording. And, you know, Obson is like the obvious choice just because of Bleed. But whenever you look at the track list, it's like, sure, you know, it's Meshuggah. It's all good, whatever. But, you know, track lists that like more connected with you, the track list that more connected with you was on Nothing, which I think, you know, rather than just trying to appeal like, oh, I put the record with Bleed on the list because that's the song.
Yeah.
You know, it makes more sense to put, you know, you still have Meshuggah on your list.
Yeah.
You know, go with the one that you connect with more. So I think that made the most sense. That was another like back and forth before the recording started here.
Yeah. And I think just the way the album opens with Stenga and then goes into Rational Gaze, which I feel like Rational Gaze is like second on the tracks, but right behind Bleed.
Yep.
It's like you know, you see the Wolf of Wall Street clip with that they dub over Rational Gaze.
About that. That's funny. Yes.
So I feel like that's also a very popular song too, but I think a little more slept on than Bleed, and I think I personally like it better than Bleed. But you know, it's maybe a little less known, maybe not. I mean, I just, you know, I feel like Bleed is the go-to.
That's the one that like even people who don't really listen to metal, just whether it's because so many memes were born out of that song or whatever. Like I feel like if you play Bleed for somebody who doesn't necessarily listen to metal, they would probably recognize
it's the Freebird
of Djent.
Yeah.
Djent Freebird. He's Bleed. I like that. That's funny.
So yeah, I definitely had to put it on my list, and it was back and forth between Obson and Nothing, but
it's good to see Meshuggah make it on one of our lists.
Yeah, I definitely, and I guess I should have just included Obson as an honorable mention as well. I think I just kind of like when I was going back and adding honorable mentions, forgot to put it on there. But right. Yeah, and we talked about it anyways. So
yeah, for sure.
So my next one, we're kind of more similar to Vola here with Tesseract Altered State. Definitely a different sound, but like similar level of heaviness, I'd say.
Sure. Yeah.
Kind of. But yeah, I think this album is just one of the also like prolific progressive metal albums that
perfect. And yeah, talk more about this. I could,
yeah, it's. I mean, everything from like the album artwork is cool. Like it's got an awesome track list. You know, the vocals he has such good vocal range, and I like the sort of like higher register vocals with a super heavy like chuggy instrumentation. It's cool. And I generally am a person who likes like all clean vocals or all heavy for the most part. I mean, there's obvious exceptions to that rule, but that's kind of where I tend to skew. And Tesseract, I think, perfectly hits that. Like they keep like clean vocals and they do it well, and then they have that heavy instrumentation that I love, and it's just like a really good mix. So, and Tesseract belongs on a list, so I had to make sure. I figured it would be on yours too, but I was like,
I'm trying to hold back because this is one of my, if not my all-time favorite progressive metal record ever. Progressive metal, progressive rock, progressive music. So I guess kind of expect to see this on my list, but I love everything about this record. I love how they split it up into like different suites of songs. I love how everything flows together. one of the coolest YouTube videos on the internet is them playing through the Of Matter suite of songs, just like live back to back to back in a studio. Like, such a great video. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much more because I want to gush on my list episode about this.
Yeah,
record.
You got to give them the proper love based on where they fall on your list.
But needless to say, and I've talked about this record before on other episodes, this is like the quintessential record for me. For when it comes to Tesseract and just progressive metal.
Yeah, They definitely hit that sweet spot for me with, the vocals and instrumentation, and definitely wanted to make sure I had them on there. And honestly, like, I was back and forth between, like, I kind of kept Meshuggah at that 7 spot, but I was like, I think I initially had Vola at 6 and Tesseract at 8, and I was just like, I don't know. I was like back and forth, and I ended up making the switch just because, I just feel like Tesseract belongs higher up on the list. Like, I love them both, and it was a tough decision to make, but it's like, and when it came down to the wire, I was like, all right, Tesseract, you get the spot.
I'm still trying to hold back. But yes, I mean, great choice that it's on your list. I probably would have like flipped the table if it wasn't. So I'm glad to see it there. Yeah,
I had to make sure that I had it on there.
Yeah, and I mean, Tesseract has other great records as well. They've gone through multiple vocalist changes and stuff like that, and other bands have sort of spun out of Tesseract as well. Good Tiger, Voices from the Fuselage, Sky Harbor. So a lot of really good bands came out of Tesseract as well. So
there's another reason they belong.
Yeah, there's just so much good from them. Daniel Tompkins' side project, White Moth, Black Butterfly, very interesting music. So I'm happy to see them on your list, and happy that it's this record too.
Yeah, I couldn't go with another one. That was like, I didn't debate about the album, just kind of where to put on the list.
Yeah,
but. Moving on to the next one, my number 5, Coheed and Cambria, Good Apollo.
Another one that I'm gonna have to hold back on. Go for it. What else? What's the reason?
Yeah, this one, it's just like, I think it hit at that time as like where I was kind of like bridging that gap from like the, like radio rock stuff, and just like, being the video game nerd I am, like playing Rock Band and having this song pop up, but also like already being a fan of Coheed, not like a super fan by any means, but I enjoyed their music just like from friends who had listened to them. But when this album came out, and then like Welcome Home, and like playing it on Rock Band, I was like, this song is so epic and so good. And then just like actually listening to the whole album, it's like, they're all the tracks on the album are good. And it was honestly hard to pick, because since then I've, very much fallen down the Coheed rabbit hole, and like I listened to all of their albums. So it was hard to pick one, but I think just because that was the one that kind of was like my turning point for like, yep, I definitely love Coheed. And that was kind of like the album that put me from the category of like a casual listener to like a Coheed fan.
Yeah, and this isn't like new news, but I like Coheed and Cambria. For me, this record is probably their proggiest record as well. I mean, they get lumped into prog rock a good bit, but I wouldn't necessarily classify all or most of what they do as prog rock. I mean, they have the concept thing, like obviously that's there, and they do mix things up stylistically, which is also a very big progressive music trait. And different time signatures at times as well, so they are a progressive band for sure.
Yeah, that's what I had them on the list and was like, I don't know if I'm going to get flack for putting them on here, but I was like, this album's proggy enough.
Yeah, they are a prog rock band. This record is a prog rock record with like, they have the poppier songs on that record as well. Your Blood Red Summer, that's not a super prog. But then there's the Willingwell Suite, which is like proggy.
Yeah,
and
just like the whole fact that it's a suite of songs,
right? So
is already like very proggy as hell.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that this is their proggiest record. They definitely have other proggy songs on other records. Gravity's Union, different tracks on the Afterman records, but their early stuff, your Second Stage or your In Keeping Secrets, there are hints of it, but for the most part, that's kind of, I don't know. I struggle to put it I struggle to put Coheed really in a box at all.
Yeah, they kind of just like do whatever.
Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say either of those records were prog rock records. I would say Good Apollo probably was their first undisputable prog rock record. Obviously, they do other things, but so do prog bands. I mean, you wouldn't listen to Great Misdirect by Between the Buried and Me and say Desert of Song is a prog song, right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't argue with me either that Between the Buried and Me is a progressive metal band. So, I mean, that's how it works. So.
Yeah, there's nuances.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I could gush all day on Good Apollo 1, and I'll do that on mine a little bit.
Yeah, since it's lower on my list, I'll leave some of that for your list, since it sounds like it's higher up. I don't remember exactly your numbers, but I know how big of a Coheed fan you are, so I'm assuming it's much higher up the list.
It's up there. It's on the list for sure.
So my next one here is Periphery Hail Stan.
Number 4.
Yeah, their newest, I think was it 2019, I think it came out.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, but until maybe I don't know, 10 minutes before the podcast, I had P2 as mine, but I don't know if part of it is the recency bias, but Hail Stan is the one that I listen to the most. I think it has more songs that I listen to regularly than P2 does. I think P2 is where I didn't like P1 quite as much, and then P2 was oh, they found something here. I really dig this album. And then I don't know, P3, it definitely has some good songs, but they kind of moved away from the sound from P2 a little. And I don't know, I feel like Hail Stan is kind of more P2 a little.
Yeah. I can see
obviously
that.
they've changed over the years, but I don't know. Sure. I feel like it's kind of it's closer.
It's got some heavier vibes than some of the other Periphery records at times, and
with Church Burner and Blood Eagle and stuff. Very.
Yeah, I like that record as well. I struggled with my own list of whether or not to even put any Periphery in my top 10, and that's that's not a knock on Periphery. It's just this is hard. It's hard to do. So
yeah,
I kind of figured they would be in your top 10, so I was like, you got this covered.
Yeah, I honestly I wanted them to be higher, but whenever I get into my top 3, I'll kind of explain why they. Yeah. I mean, they were right there. They got 4th, so yeah, they were real close to podium spot.
Yeah, have we seen Periphery since Hail Stan?
I've actually never seen Periphery live.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah,
I swear we were at a show together with
I
Periphery.
haven't seen them. No.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I was gonna go. They did that Hail Stan tour, and they came here, and it was September, October, I think, after the album had come out, and I really wanted to go to that one, but it was during the week, and I had to work early the next day.
I don't know why I thought that we had seen Periphery together at some point.
I wish I had been.
Oh man, I just manifested you there, and you were there in spirit. That's crazy.
I'm always there in spirit with the Periphery
I've seen Periphery
show.
A good bit. The first time I ever saw them was actually before P2 came out. It was in 2010-ish, 2011 at a festival at an old roller rink.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting concert. Impending Doom was there. Stick to Your Guns was there.
It's a mix.
It was a very interesting festival type situation. I was there with Andrew Rush and I don't remember who else. a band called Kitty. I don't know if you've ever heard of Kitty. It's like an all-female like metal band. I don't know if they still exist.
No, I've never heard of them.
But that was it was a very interesting show.
That's a funny mix.
But yeah, Periphery like real early on in their like existence, and I wasn't a fan. I wasn't listening to, I think I was there for like Stick to Your Guns or something like that. I don't remember, but
that checks out.
Yeah,
you're a big Stick to Your Guns fan.
But
I am too. But
I wasn't like big into them at that time. They played like all stuff off of their like they played like Jetpacks Was Yes and stuff like that.
From their first album,
right.
Yeah.
Like Icarus was like big then. Icarus Lives or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't big into it. I didn't actually vibe with it. It wasn't until P2 came out that I feel like I vibed with Periphery.
Yeah, I think they took P1 and like they still had a lot of that sound, but they just refined it. And it was like P1 is kind of like now listening to it. It's a little rough, but P2 is like P1 on steroids, and it's just like it's got all of the goodness of P1, but like refined.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, I feel like for me, Hailstan is like even more so like refined. That I feel like Spencer's voice has gotten better, and then just like their experimentation with like Reptile is just like this super long song that just like changes it up, and it go like kind of gets softer at points, and then it like crescendos and like kind of has that sort of like, and then goes into like super heavy, and it's kind of all over the place, and I love that song.
Yeah, they do a lot of cool things. They do a lot of cool things on that record. A lot of different things. It wasn't super high up there for me, that record in particular, but I know you vibe a lot more with Periphery than I do. So
yeah, they're definitely one of my at least like recent favorite bands.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into that top three, huh?
Yeah, my number 3 is Between the Buried and Me's Color album.
That, how can you not have a Between the Buried and Me record on your list? Obviously, if you're a fan of prog and just modern prog metal, whatever, it's kind of hard to not be a fan of Between the Buried and Me. And Colors, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I honestly, like, I had a back and forth on Great Misdirect versus Colors, because I know, like, we've talked about it on episodes before, that like it's hard because, depending on like when you ask us, like at one point it may be like, oh, Great Misdirect is definitely my favorite, but then others is like, oh no, it's definitely Colors. And
yeah, I
just, having like listened through all of the Between the Buried and Me vinyl that I have, which isn't all of them, but I do have Colors, Great Misdirect, Coma Ecliptic. I think I have Silent Circus too. I can't remember for sure. But me and my wife listened to them all like in order, and just kind of solidified that for me, I think Colors is the one. Between the Buried and Me definitely had to make my list, because they're the ones that got me into heavy music and, into progressive metal. So they for sure belonged on my list. And just Colors, I feel like, is anyone who's a fan of progressive metal, I feel like has to appreciate Between the Buried and Me. Maybe Colors isn't their favorite album by them, but I feel like most people respect that the choice. Yeah,
Informal Gluttony, Son of Nothing, Into the Sky, White Walls. But then if you look at Great Misdirect, Swim to the Moon is typically revered pretty heavily, and Obfuscation is obviously an amazing track, and Fossil Genera, and they have a lot of really, really, really good music, so it's really hard, but I think from a consistency standpoint, Colors make sense.
I just felt in my gut I had to go with Colors.
And from like a differentiation standpoint, you get a lot of tracks. You look at a song, or you look at a record like Great Misdirect, and there's 6 songs, even though it's like an hour long. It's just
Yeah, you get more bang for your buck kind of with Colors. Like there are more songs and they're all different, whereas you have less songs. And I mean, they're both great albums, but I feel like you could, throw a dart at a board and hit more good songs from Colors than with
that is kind
track.
of a thing, right? Like if you're like, well, let me think of my top 10 Between the Buried and Me tracks. Likely 5 of them, most of them are probably from Colors. So it makes sense.
Yeah. So I had to put that one on there.
Yeah, good call. Number 2.
Number 2 is Mastodon's Crack the Sky. This one, I feel like, I don't know, you probably expected it from me.
I did, yeah, because I know that you're a Mastodon fan. I know that they're probably one of your favorite bands, if not your favorite. I guess it might rotate or flip or whatever.
It definitely does, depending on the time. But I don't know, Crack the Sky is just, it's like, it's got that very classic rock vibe, like sort of like Led Zeppelin kind of. It was like if Led Zeppelin were to keep making music today, I feel like this is kind of what they would sound like. There's just a lot of that classic rock vibe that, I grew up with my mom and dad listening to, like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and those type of bands. So this is kind of like that spiritual successor album. And It's also like really heavy at parts. And I love all the guys in Mastodon. Like they seem like really funny, cool dudes. Like they just love everything about the band. And this album is definitely the one for me that's my favorite. I definitely like Blood Mountain. This is like their heaviest one, is really good too. But I don't know. I just feel like from front to back, Crack the Sky is just like a damn near perfect album.
Yeah, I was never a major Mastodon fan. I liked some of their stuff, but I never put their stuff into any playlists of mine or anything like that.
Yeah.
For the most part, they were never a band that like hit my radar enough to like have them in my rotation. But I did get to see them play Crack the Sky in its entirety live, which is kind of cool.
It's so funny, like, you weren't a Periphery fan and not a Mastodon fan. You've seen them both live, and they're like...
Well, I've seen Periphery, like 5 times, somewhere in there. But yeah, well, Mastodon toured with Coheed, and it was the Unheavenly Sky tour, and they played Crack the Sky in its entirety, and so Coheed was touring in support of Vaxis 1.
Yeah, so, that would have been a cool...
Yeah, it was tour. A cool show. And honestly, I really enjoyed Mastodon live, and I did listen to Crack the Sky, but also other Mastodon tracks sort of in preparation to see them live. And I do enjoy their stuff, and I do listen to more of their stuff now in some of my playlists, and our Progressive Djentlemen Essentials playlist. I know there's a few Mastodon tracks on there too.
It just like, it starts off with Oblivion, which is such a good song, and then they're like every, like I said earlier, every song on here is just really good, but I'd say my favorites are probably Oblivion, and then there's the Tsar, Usurper / Escape / Martyr / Spiral. It's an 11-minute track, but it's kind of multiple tracks. Also the name is it kind of like built a suite of songs into one song almost. Which
there's a rumor that Coheed's doing that on Vaxis too, so we'll see how that plays out.
That'd be cool. And then The Last Baron, which is like the song that it wraps up with, which is also a 13-minute long track, and it's like the start, middle, and end tracks are all like my favorite. So it's just like, if there are any in Quintessence and Crack the Sky are also fantastic songs too. It's just like there's not really a lull in this album or like a skippable track. And I know some people throw them more in like the kind of like stoner rock, doom metal category than they do progressive rock or progressive metal. But I feel like they definitely fit in that category of progressive rock and metal. Depending on which album you talk about, like Blood Mountain is much more metal, whereas Crack the Sky I'd probably throw closer into the rock. I mean, it still like straddles the line, I think, but
yeah, it does. It definitely straddles the line. I see the argument for progressive, and I see the argument for prog rock for this record, but
yeah, there are just so many things. Yeah, so it's like
it's hard to put any band, especially like modern metal, modern rock, prog, whatever, into like a box.
Yeah, I feel like
so many bands do so many different things.
Yeah, and I feel like bands now, because they don't want to like they don't want their music to be stale, that they're kind of like pushing and blending genres. So there's a lot of bands that are kind of like a fusion of multiple genres. So it is kind of hard to like solely put most bands into a specific category. But
yeah, a lot of experimentation going on in modern metal rock, whatever. So,
but Mastodon's one of those bands that's a hill I'll die on. It belongs on this list, and I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah, no, it's your list, man. You do what you want.
And so I guess moving on to the numero uno.
Number 1
is The Contortionist's Language.
I love it.
This was a very tough decision because I also love Exoplanet, which was an honorable mention. They're both very different albums. One, Language being a much more rocky album.
Yeah,
it's still definitely heavy
it's still
too,
like
but
prog metal-ish, but that was definitely the beginning of the Contortionists' transition to being more of a prog rock band.
Yeah.
Where Exoplanet is very much like a Between the Buried and Me style, like progressive metal record.
Yeah, and this is, like I said earlier, the I tend to like either like all screams or all clean vocals in my music, and this is the exception and also my number 1.
I mean, technically Between the Buried and Me too.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, I feel like Tommy Rogers. I don't know why I just said Tony.
He is half Tony Stark, half Tommy Rogers.
I just invented a new human.
Iron Man. All right.
But I feel like even his clean vocals still have that kind of like raspy nature to them for the most part.
Voice, yeah. Both his like clean vocals and his like harsh vocals, screams, whatever you want to call them, are unique to him. Yeah,
and so I feel like that's why that's like also a kind of an exception. But with Mike Lassard's clean vocals, like they're very much clean vocals. Like he's very sort of like angelic at times the way he sings.
It's got that like that pop singer vocal a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, and like generally this wouldn't be a type of song that or type of music that would resonate as much with me, but I don't know, there's something about Language that this album just shifts between this awesome like atmospheric, like you can kind of just zone out and like just sit back and relax and enjoy it, and then it just hits you with this like barrage of heavy instrumentation out of nowhere, and I don't know, it's just like such a cool experience. And it's an album that before I kind of had the fancy Bluetooth thing in the car, it was, plug in a CD, and I was like, Language was one of the only CDs I had. And so whenever I would drive for work, it was just, I'm listening to Language. And, I've probably listened to this album like several hundred times through from front to back, and like it never gets old. And then they did the rediscovered version and like, made these, they covered, they changed the song. Like it's the same vocals and the same song, but doing it acoustically and, making it more of an acoustic rock album. It's still also awesome. And it's cool to hear those in that version as well. So like that, this is my exception.
I really enjoy the rediscovered tracks. But yeah, Language in general is fantastic. It is tough to make a decision if you're picking one Contortionist record between like Language, Exoplanet, even Intrinsic is good. I mean, Clairvoyant is good in its own right as well. I mean, it is different. But like Godspeed off of that record,
I feel like
that song.
at first, like immediately I went to language, and then I kind of started thinking about it. I was like, but clairvoyant's really good, and like also a similar sound. And it's like, do I put clairvoyant? And then was like, oh no, I completely forgot exoplanet. And then so that kind of pushed clairvoyant off my list, and was debating between those two. But
language is a good choice if you're a fan of both styles that the Contortionist has brought, which is that exoplanet and intrinsic sound, which is kind of a borderline between the Buried in Me clone-ish type sound. And then language, they sort of start to kind of develop their new sound, and it's a good transition between what they sounded like on Exoplanet and Intrinsic and what they sound like now on Clairvoyant and the Our Bones EP that they released. So I think that's a good like middle ground record to pick.
Yeah.
And I do think it's iconic. I mean, I do think it's probably their most noteworthy record as a whole. I mean, I know Flourish and Oscillator, you know, those are tracks that people, especially on the heavier side of prog, tend to like gravitate towards.
Yeah, but I feel like language is one that, like you said, it kind of straddles that line where it's kind of like got fans on both sides of the fence. I actually saw a thing in I think it was a Facebook group, it was like a gent shit posting or something like that. But it was a post that was just like, oh look, an album that nobody hates, and it had the language album artwork, and like people were commenting on it, and it seemed like overwhelmingly the people that commented were like, oh dude, I love this album. So it's good to see that it's not just like, you know, a few people are like our, you know, friend group of people that are, you know, enjoy language, but otherwise like people shit on it or something. It seems like language is definitely like a prolific album for progressive rock and metal, and you know, just it's like it is kind of that good middle ground between their heavy stuff and their like more recent like softer stuff. So
I feel like it came out at a time where I was just starting to get more into like progressive rock-ish stuff. I was still pretty heavy in progressive metal. Like this, it came out in like 2014. I'm gonna look it up real quick.
That sounds about right.
But yeah, it came out, 2014. So that's about the time that I was getting into bands like the Deer Hunter a little bit, and bands like I was obviously into Coheed. What's another good prog rock band that I was into at that time? My brain's drawing all kinds of blanks, but I wasn't into Delta Sleep yet, so I can't even throw them out there. But regardless, that was kind of a time where I was making that. Arcane Roots was a band I was trying to think of, and I was like, there's a local band called Arcane Haven that I was also listening to, and they were actually at that festival that I was just talking about a little bit ago at that that roller rink or whatever it used to be. They're interesting. Check them out. I don't actually know if they still exist, but in my brain I was trying to think of Arcane Roots, and I kept going to Arcane Haven, which is not what I was trying to come up with. But yeah, and also getting more into like the softer instrumental stuff, like some of Pliny's stuff and just instrumental in general. Tesseract was big for me at that point too. So like it was cool to like I was still able to vibe with it. I wasn't still firmly in the like progressive metal camp where I was like, they don't sound like Between the Buried and Me anymore. I can't listen to this garbage, which I know a lot of people like jumped on that. So
I know the more recent albums, some people like prefer Exoplanet that like, but still seemed like they liked language, but then now they've gone even further into like the rock camp. And I feel like some people are kind of like upset about that.
I know a lot of people were hoping that Clairvoyant would have been like an Exoplanet 2 type of situation. I think that was even like a thing that was trending. Not that it's trending enough that, you know, it was like a globally recognized thing, but trending in like the fan groups and stuff. And Clairvoyant certainly was not that. So I just think there are people that are clinging to the past here, and I think we just need to understand that the Contortionist is a progressive rock band now. I just think that that's where they're going to end up.
Yeah.
So, either appreciate it for what it is, or
move on.
keep clinging to those older records, and start listening to bands that are putting out the music that you do like to listen to. So
yeah,
for me, I'm excited. I like their progressive rock sound as well, but at the same time, I also would get behind an Exoplanet too.
Yeah, like I'm honestly I feel like I'd be happy either way for their next album. I just want them to drop a damn album.
I know,
and stop,
they've been
teasing it
shows. I don't know about I'll take anything. I'd love to see them tour. I'd love to go again. I did make a prediction in an older one that there's going to be a future tour with Cynic between the Buried and Me and the Contortionist. I could totally see that happening. But yeah, I anything that shows life.
Yeah,
that's what I'm looking forward to. Which their social medias have started to be active again. They've been posting a lot of touring photos, so I would assume that it's likely going to be a tour announcement of some kind. But either way, anything would be great. But Language, that's a great number one. Anything the Contortionist would have been a great number one for sure.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I put the list together, it was like, I don't know how I feel about this list. Like looking at it, it's like I feel like I got to move some stuff up or down and shift things around. But having spoken it and discussed it, I feel comfortable with my top 10, and it definitely seems like this is kind of encompasses my tastes for the most part. So too.
Do you want to do a quick recap, 10 to 1?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so number 10 was Animals as Leaders, Joy of Motion. 9 was Delta Sleep's Spring Island. 8 was Vola's Witness. Meshuggah, Nothing is number 7. Number 6 is Tesseract, Altered State. Number 5 is Coheed and Cambria's Good Apollo. 4 is Periphery, Hail Stan. 3 is Between the Buried and Me, Colors. 2, Mastodon, Crack the Sky. And number 1, The Contortionist, Language.
There you have it, folks. So that is the top 10 prog records according to Matt. Pretty solid list across the board, 10 to 1. Solid honorable mentions as well. And yeah, I mean, you guys might not agree, so tell us what Matt missed on his list.
Yeah, and let us know if there's give us your top 10s. Whenever we post the announcement for this episode, we'll have I'll share my list in a visual format so it's easier to follow along too. And then feel free to post, give us your top 10s. I'd be curious to see. Yeah, absolutely, as well as any suggestions for other lists. Any top 10 metalcore records, top 10 prog songs. Anything you can think of. That would be interesting content for us to make. Give us a challenge, whatever. It'd be fun to have your input. Yeah, well, these lists are fun to do. Is just kind of digging through previous albums and kind of my listening history and stuff is kind of it's like a nostalgia trip, but also a fun little activity. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. But yeah, so let us know what you think and keep an eye out for the next episode, which will be my top 10. And let us know whose is better. It's definitely mine. But anyways, thanks again for listening and, supporting us. And we appreciate likes, follows, ratings, all that stuff. Yeah, all the things. Our social media, Instagram, it's just at Progressive Djentlemen, at Prog Gent Pod on Twitter, and we are actually streaming now on Amazon Music and Audible. So if you're listening to us on there, what's up? If you're not and you would rather be listening to us on there, it's available now. You can do so. And if you have an Amazon account and want to just go follow us there, that's cool too. Anything helps. And again, we appreciate your time. Thanks for listening to us. Yeah, thanks.